It's Mr. Boll here, and we're having a special assembly today all about the VE Day 75th anniversary celebrations. So, we're going to talk today about what VE Day is and why we're having the special celebrations this year. World War II, as I'm sure you know, it was from 1939 to 1945. Here's Britain. The colours are for the number of casualties, so the number of people who were affected in relation to the population. So Britain had casualties. Here's lots of other countries. These countries were fighting on our side. Canada, the USA, South Africa, Australia, India. A lot of those countries were in the former British Empire. Here's New Zealand, and lots of people came from there to fight with us. There are even higher casualties in parts of Europe here that you can see in Poland and over here in Russia. Okay, so World War II affected the whole world. Now we're particularly focusing on World War II in Europe because that's where most of the British forces went to, the soldiers, sailors and air force. So World War II in Europe. Now here's the situation in 1942, and all the countries that are a shade of red are fighting on the side of the Nazis, okay, or they've been taken over, like France was, by the Nazis, and so that is looking for us quite bad. Here's our side, here's some countries in Africa that were supporting us, and here is Russia, which is on our side. But it's not looking too good in 1942. However, with the help, especially on D-Day, with the help of America and Canada, we launched an attack from Britain to take back France from the Nazis, and that was D-Day of 1944 on June the 6th. And here's a map to show what happened on that day, and here's the different beaches that were attacked in Normandy by British soldiers and American and Canadian. And they managed to get, this was a very tough battle. They managed to get past the very good defences that the Germans had there on the north coast of France. And once they got through there, it still took them a year to fight all the way through France and Germany and get to Berlin. And while the British and American forces and other countries that were on our side were fighting from the west, the Russians were attacking from the east, and eventually the Allies met in Berlin and the war was over. And that day was May the 8th, 1945. Okay, and so the reason we call it VE Day is it's Victory in Europe. So Victory in Europe Day. Okay, and so we should just remember that that wasn't the complete end of the war, because Victory in Japan Day, that didn't happen until August the 15th, 1945, and there were lots of British forces who were still based out there fighting in the Far East. And so they didn't have such a great celebration on VE Day, but most people did. Now, part of the day is to remember people who lost their lives in the war in World War II. It's an estimated 380,000 UK military people who lost their lives, and also 70,000 civilians who weren't in any of the forces, and some of them were children. So very sad, and we do use the day to remember, but it's not the same as Poppy Day, which is a Remembrance Day, as you know. It's also a day for celebrating. Okay, so these are some of the people in the army. You can see good British tradition here. They're all having a nice cup of tea. Some of the people in the Navy, people in the Air Force. All of these people fought in World War II. And for the first time, there were women involved in the forces in World War II, and these are Wrens, which is part of the women's branch of the Navy. Now, World War II was the first war to affect absolutely everybody, man, woman or child, whether they were in the forces or not. So everybody at home was affected as well. And here's one of the ways in which they would be affected. Here is, and you might look at that and say, well, okay, that's a nice meal. But actually, that was your ration for the whole week of these things. You could get other things, and you could grow your own vegetables in your garden, but you couldn't get any more eggs than one each for the week, one rasher of bacon, one pork chop, two sausages, and here's a bit of butter and a bit of cheese, and I think this is a bit of black pudding and a bit of liver, and they had to last you for the whole week. And I know some of you will be saying, oh, I don't like liver, but you trust me, the people who were living in the war who didn't have much to go round, they would have enjoyed having that. So World War II, the way we remember it is because it affected everybody. And here's your ration book that you would have had to take down to the shop, and you couldn't buy more bacon than one slice because you weren't allowed. And as the war developed, people said, well, let's all dig in our back gardens. So everybody was digging their back garden, or even in a public park. They turned some of it over to grow more vegetables so that people could have enough to eat. During World War II, there was the Blitz in Britain. Lots and lots of bombs were dropped. They were especially dropped on cities and places where there was a dockyard, where British forces, British Navy ships were being built, and on factories. But they were also dropped on cities where there was a lot of people living. Here's some of the damage that was done in some of the British cities. You know that London was damaged, but so were lots of other cities as well. And here's the famous Spitfire. Then these planes did a good job of trying to keep the attacking bombers off, but they weren't able to stop all of them. And that's a Spitfire, we should note, was invented just down the road in Southampton. So when the bombs were dropping during an air raid, you had to shelter, and you could go down, if you were lucky enough to have a garden, you'd build one of these in your garden. It's an Anderson shelter, and you'd go down in there. And a lot of people spent a large part of the war every single night sleeping down in their shelter. But if you didn't have a garden and you lived in a big city like London, you might have to go down into the underground station and sleep on the platform. So times were hard for everybody, and children were evacuated from cities to keep them safe from the bombing, and they went to safe areas in the country. This is actually my dad, and he was evacuated from Newcastle, which was being bombed a lot. And he was evacuated across Britain to the other side of Britain to the Lake District. He was lucky and he loved it and had a fantastic time. Some people loved their evacuation experience and some people didn't. Everybody was doing their bit for the war, so you couldn't go around acting as if it was nothing to do with you. These people are land girls, and they've been called up, like the boys were called up into the forces, the girls will be called up to do this sort of work. And they go down to be sent to a farm where they'd have to help out and work really, really hard, producing enough food for everybody. And this lady is volunteered, so she's not being paid. She's a warden. You see the W on here. And she goes around when there's been an air raid, and if necessary, she'll dig people out of their shelter and potentially save their life. These people are volunteers as well. They're working in London. They could sometimes be working all night, volunteer firefighters to put all these fires out from the bombing. And another thing that you might have heard about from World War II is that everybody had to keep calm and carry on. And so here's a milkman. You can see some of the Year 5s have already seen this picture, but here's a bombing in London. Lots of houses have been blown up, but he's just carrying on with his job. So you can see how the war affected every single person in Britain. World War II, and we remember all of their sacrifices, the people who died, the people who went without much food, the people who were scared, the people who were being evacuated, and that's why we have VE Day, to commemorate their achievements. So it's not really a sad day. There are elements of it that are sad, but we're also celebrating victory in Europe. So it's the 75th anniversary this year. You're going to do some things at school to help to make sure you remember it and enjoy it. There's a couple of things that are going on, I should say, around the whole country. So at 11 o'clock, there'll be a 2-minute silence. And that bit is like Poppy Day, where we'll just show our respects by just being quiet for 2 minutes and spare a thought for people who lost family members. Then at 4 p.m., some people, what they're doing is they're going out in the front in their street, but they must obviously remember to carry on with the social distancing, and they're going to have a cup of tea and join in perhaps a little bit chatting with their neighbours. So that's scheduled to probably take place about 4 o'clock. Your family will know whether you're doing that or not. And then on the telly at 9 o'clock, it's going to be a sing-along of a famous song from the war called We'll Meet Again, which is all about the people have been split up because some of them have got to go off and fight, but they're singing a song about how they're going to be happy to get back together again soon. And this lady, she sang it in the war. She's called Vera Lynn, and that's what she looked like back then in wartime. And she's still alive, and here she is now. She's 103, and she's going to be on the telly on Friday evening leading this sing-along. So that could be fun. If your parents don't mind you staying up that late, you might want to join in with that. So those are a few things that you can do to join in and show your respects for the generation that fought in World War II. Okay, have a lovely day. All the best. Bye for now.